Hey, Donnie, how you doing?
Good, Steve, how are you?
We saw a fairly significant trade a couple of hours ahead of the draft, and then not much during the draft. What was the chatter like? Do you think the activity will pick up tomorrow?
I think there'll be some pick movement tomorrow. You saw a little bit of it in a couple of trade back scenarios. I think some teams were certainly trying to get into to possibly the first round. You saw a few teams are certainly controlling some of the volume of the picks, and but they hold the cards in that matter. The trade talk, player for player, and the money movement, as we discussed before, continues, but obviously it becomes a little more muted during the draft around those 2 days.
Thank you, Steve. We'll go next to Matt Porter. Go ahead, Matt.
Evening, Don. Based on how things have developed, how active do you expect to be in the trade market this week?
Matt, there's a lot of conversations going on. Obviously, you saw, two teams find a deal and a little bit of trade movement within the draft and move backs. But again, a lot of these conversations are focused around cap dynamics. And then you've got free agency. So what teams are sort of jockeying in terms of re-signing their own players. Washington was able to do that. In re-signing in one of their players. We're all trying to do the same thing simultaneously, and it's a busy week. I know there's been a lot of conversations, but I can't predict how many trades will actually take place.
Thank you, Matt. We'll go next to Evan Marinowski. Go ahead, Evan.
Don, I'm just wondering, obviously you didn't draft anyone tonight, but what was it like experiencing the virtual draft? What did it, what kind of challenges did it pose? Sort of how did it go for you?
Obviously we monitored every pick, and we had been making calls, prior to trying to get into the first round and what that was going to, cost us. It looked like it went relatively smoothly. Technologically, it didn't look like there was any snafus whatsoever. Obviously you don't have a full component of your staff in amongst, but we had, our staff on teams. The communication stuff seemed pretty seamless. I think NHL did a good job, and I credit our own technical staff and people involved, and I'm sure the other teams would say the same.
Thanks, Evan. We'll go next to Mike Loftus. Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, Don. With respect to it being remote and not having people at the tables and stuff like that, do you think that maybe that suppressed, any deals that were made actually once the round began? Because we usually see, quite a bit of that.
There's certainly table-to-table interaction during the draft, and it makes it a little more readily available, picking up the phone and as teams are kind of jockeying, you have extra. So the communication is going to be unique. Everybody has each other's cells, and you got multiple people and landlines that you can contact. So, that remains to be seen whether or not it'll be a little less volume, but it is a little more challenging rather than just picking up the phone or meeting somebody on the draft floor prior to, a lot of times you get to the draft early and you're certainly have been having conversations leading up to it, and then you may be able to do something right then, or it's that one of those things. Well, if our player's there, let me see if our player's there, and if not, give me a call or I'll call you back. And you got to be on top of that during the remote situations that we're all under.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. We'll go next to James Murphy. Scott McLaughlin, you're on deck. Go ahead, James. Jimmy.
Hey, Don, how are you?
Hey, Jimmy, how are you?
Good. I just wanted, if you can't tell me, I totally understand. I wanted it for a story, and I was wondering when you have until figure it out. Have you guys decided what you're going to do with the bonus overage hit yet?
Yeah, we've already had to decide that. We've split ours up in a portion, half this year and half next year.
Okay, thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
Reminder to media, if you have questions, please put your hand up. If you no longer have one, you can go ahead and put your hand down. We'll go next to Scott McLaughlin. Go ahead, Scott.
Hey, Don. You mentioned that you had a couple of phone conversations about what it might cost to get into the first round. Did you ever feel like you're particularly close to anything as it relates to tonight?
Ultimately it didn't land, so you'd have to ask the other team how receptive they were. Teams generally are monitoring the pick and the player pool that they have a choice to choose from at that particular time, and what the costs associated with the discussions you're having. obviously it didn't come to fruition. So I can't handicap what it may or may not have been.
Thank you, Scott. We'll go next back to Matt Porter and then Mike Loftus. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, Don, there's been reports about a defenseman out in Arizona. I'll ask you just because, are you understanding that you're one of the finalists for that guy?
I'm reading a lot about it. I mean, I certainly can't comment on any other player and any other team. The conversations we're having, I made it pretty clear I'm not going to talk about any players that may be discussed on our own team. It's our jobs as general managers to make sure that we're aware of who's available and try to have those types of conversations that might help benefit your own club, and that's what the other teams are doing. So.
And as a follow-up, has there been any extra movement on Torrey?
No.
Thank you, Matt. If there's no other hands, we'll wrap up tonight with Mike Loftus. Go ahead, Mike.
Hi, Don. So, I mean, there is another day to this draft. What are your guys, thinking, you can come out of tomorrow with, a lot hasn't been discussed about, the depth or lack of depth in this draft. What's their level of optimism about tomorrow?
Well, our guys are now excited. I mean, they sat around all night, monitoring and getting excited about the potential players that we're going to have an opportunity to draft tomorrow. We need to do a good job. They've worked awfully hard prior to the shutdowns of the leagues, and certainly since then they've covered a lot of ground and a lot of meetings, and they've done a good job to put us in a position to have a really solid list. We feel the draft is deep, and we'll find good players when we pick, and possibly, if I do my job, I can try and accumulate a few more picks. I mean, it remains to be seen, but again, some of the teams control a volume of those picks, and we'll see where we land.